Now, then the question is how to explain local concentrations of this kind. The existing methods studied commonalities across many cases of violence or concentrated on in-depth case study of one riot or two. This was the pattern earlier, before my team started studying it. Just study some riots and conclude from that, right? Or one riot in depth and conclude from that. Now here is the problem with that. Suppose on the basis of commonalities, suppose you studied 6 of them, or studied 4 of them, or 3 of them, 3 riots. Suppose on the basis of commonalities you find that inter-ethnic economic rivalry, and I'm using the term ethnic in common interchangeably here, polarized party politics and segregated neighborhoods explain violence. Let's call economic rivalry between groups A, polarized party politics B, segregated neighborhood C, and violence X. We are saying X is a function of A, B, and C. That's what we say. Violence is caused by A, B, and C. But how can we be sure that our judgments are right? What if A, B, and C also exist in peaceful cases, which let's call them Y? In that case, either violence caused is by the intensity of A, B, and C in X, or there is yet another factor in which I was terribly interested, D, which is present in Y but not in X, but we didn't discover D because we only studied X. Right? So, in short, until we study ethnic peace, we will not be able to have a good theory of ethnic conflict. Peace and violence have to be studied together. This is the idea of variation. But you have to make sure that you don't study apples and oranges. The one other basis for an important principle of scientific empirical inquiry is that you study apples and apples and oranges, not apples and oranges. Which means you can't just randomly pick 2 cities. You need to select your cities on the basis of a principle. So our team selected Aligarh and Calicut, 35% Muslim, on the basis of demography. It selected Lucknow and Hyderabad, 30 to 35% Muslim, and Ahmedabad and Surat, 14 to 15% Muslim, also from the same state historically and currently. So the tightest comparison was Ahmedabad, Surat. This is what is called some kind of natural experiment or quasi-experimental method. This is not what is called experimental method in psychology and economics today, where you do randomized control trials where you have treatment and control, right? But the idea is roughly similar. In an experiment, a treatment is given. We can't give a treatment of riot, something, etc., or its cause to create a riot. That's not how this research can be done. That's not how civil war research can be done. You'll be arrested if you try to do that, and you shouldn't try to create a riot. So this is what we studied then, and why was demography the control? That depends on prior theory. So whether you asked the left or the right, both had a demographic theory actually. The right would argue when Muslims are more than 20% of a city's or constituency's population, then given a first past the post system, they become uppity, and that leads to Hindu anxiety, and that leads to rioting. If you push Advani, he would make that claim at that time. Not anymore. He's much more controlled now, right? Now, the left would argue that it's not when Muslims are more than 20%, it's not the Hindu anxiety, it's Hindu desire to suppress Muslims, which leads to the same result. So both had a demographic notion, and one of the most important administrators of this country, N.C. Saxena, has a full-blown argument about 20 to 35%. As an administrator, having served in UP cadre of IAS, and now until 17th May, a very important member of National Advisory Council, with whom I've clashed actually on communal violence. He wrote the communal violence bill, which is still a bill, not a law. Okay, so the demography, therefore, I knew this theory was, having grown up in UP, NC Saxena grew up in UP and was an administrator also in UP. I knew NC Saxena was wrong because I had lived in cities where Hindus and Muslims are roughly similar in proportion, or, I was not thinking like this at that time, but the texture of life was very different. For example, as a child in the town of Charkhari, Hamirpur, where my father was posted, I grew up with Muslims all around me. When my father came to the city of Aligarh, the only city I knew out of these 6, when I came to Aligarh, then all of a sudden I found I had no Muslim friends. I couldn't find them anywhere. They were not in my school. So, as I was thinking about this, I started thinking of this project, this image came back, that from roughly 10 to 13 years of age, I only had Muslim friends, and from 13 to 16, I had no Muslim friends. Even though in both towns there were lots of Muslims. So it's at the back of my mind, and then once this was set up this way, the argument that emerged was this. And before the argument is put forth, let's just go through the concept that will be central here is civil society. Let's come to that a little later. The argument that emerged that there's a difference between intercommunal links and intracommunal links. Networks and organizations that integrated Hindus and Muslims, and networks and organizations that are all Hindu or all Muslim. In Putnam's language, the first is called bridging capital, where networks cross religious boundary, and when networks do not cross religious boundary, it's called bonding capital. Bonding versus bridging. With towns that had bridging, had a tendency, had a predisposition towards peace. At towns which only had bonding, where there were no networks available, or very few networks available between Hindus and Muslims, had a predisposition towards rioting. And this was specified further. Then another distinction was drawn, and the next distinction was between associational or organizational forms of networks or engagements, and everyday forms of civic engagement. Business associations, professional organizations of lawyers, doctors, teachers, students. There are towns in many parts, as you know, many towns of India are educational towns. Many towns of India have courts, right? Judicial headquarters. Allahabad, another town where I spent a lot of time, had literally 20 to 30,000 lawyers. Because it was judicial headquarters. The seat of High Court, UP High Court, right? Or there were towns which are educational towns, where there are lots of universities. I think Bangalore, for example, Bangalore has lots of things, but Bangalore is a major educational town. So the kinds of relationship that would form between Hindus and Muslims in educational settings of Bangalore might color the life of the whole city. And certainly when Bangalore was smaller, that was true in some ways. Right? So on. And reading clubs and film clubs and sports clubs and festival organizations. Now, in the film clubs of North India, which I would participate in, would be the 10 of us watching Ingmar Bergman's films at the India International Center in Delhi or something like that. Andre Vaida's films, Polish embassy started a film club, and 10 people would go from Jawaharlal Nehru University and watch those films. Another 5 would come from Delhi University. Now the film clubs of southern India, of Kerala, of Tamil Nadu, of Andhra, and Karnataka, these are the so-called fan clubs, right? They have literally thousands of people. They've been studied extensively. These are not 15 people watching a film of NTR. These are thousands of people watching and discussing NTR. There is no Amitabh Bachchan club in North India, where thousands of people watch Amitabh Bachchan's films and exchange notes on how he acted in Diwar and how he acted in Zanjeer, and a comparison of that, right? Now, once you have clubs which have thousands and thousands of people, there is a kind of interaction that takes place. There are kinds of bonds that are formed, right? So on and so forth. Trade unions and political parties as well. Political parties in one-party systems are extension of the state, but political parties in multi-party systems are both part of the state and part of civil society. And this requires us to go back, therefore, the idea, what is civil society? That space in our social life, located between the state institutions on the one hand and families on the other, which allows people to come together for a whole variety of public activities, and which is relatively independent of the state. This is a spatial definition of civil society. There are all kinds of definitions available. Political theorists don't like this definition. It's an empirical and spatial definition. They want to invest a lot of normative considerations, right? They want to invest a lot of consideration into this concept that civil society has to be very good. We say civil society could be very uncivil as well. So RSS for us is part of civil society, spatially. Because neither part of the state, formally, nor it's inside the family, it's somewhere between the two. KKK in America, by this definition, Ku Klux Klan, which targets blacks, kills them also, no longer possible, or no longer easy, was for us part of civil society. And this definition, this spatial definition then, allows us to say that civil society is not a non-political but a non-state space of collective life. These are two different things, right? It's not non-political. Trade unions are political. Political parties are political. Business associations are not political directly. Film clubs are not directly political. They simply admire NTR or MGR or Jayalalitha and what have you. Okay. Now, so this argument therefore became an argument about civil society. And we calculated, of course, we calculated, as empirical researchers, we calculated things like whether Hindus and Hindu-Muslim families visit each other. This is everyday engagement. And associational engagement was about associations, professional organizations. We calculated these also. Membership there or the activities, etc. And we came to the conclusion, I came to the conclusion, you'll see Wilkinson's argument is different. Both forms of engagement, if robust, promote peace. Contrariwise, the absence of weakness opens up space for communal violence. Of the two, associational forms turn out to be sturdier than everyday engagement, especially when confronted with the attempts by politicians to polarize ethnic communities. Right? And vigorous associational life, if bridging, not bonding, acts as a serious constraint over the polarizing strategies of political elites. This is an anti-consociational argument. It says consociational type of pillars, where life is about bonding, not bridging. Those pillars have a predisposition towards violence. And bridging, not all bridging would lead to peace, but bridging creates conditions for peace much more than bonding. So why does bridging have this result? So one of these is quite simple. Prior and sustained contact between members of different communities allows communication between them to moderate tensions and preempt violence when such tensions arise. All fires are preceded by some sparks. Right? It could be for any number of reasons. Some of them we've discussed. Let's save time and move on. So, I found that where there was a lot of interaction, a decentralized mechanism was very easy to create. It's called a peace committee at the neighborhood level, in which both Hindus and Muslims participate. If there is no interaction, the peace committee either would not exist or would have only Hindus or only Muslims, or it would be imposed by the administration, which also doesn't work. An organically emerging peace committee is a very good way to kill rumors. Organically emerging peace committee. I have given some examples yesterday, right? Sheikh Mahmood Banihar, that example about the video of a gang rape. That would not have happened with or the way it led to peace in his neighborhood, and virtually all of old city of Surat would not have happened without those prior contacts that he had with Hindus as business partners. The second is more interesting, because you can ask, there is a critique that emerged of my argument that state is more important than civil society, and there is no state in my argument. No, This is not what I argued. The argument was, in cities that have associational integration as well, not just everyday engagement, the foundations of peace are stronger. Without a nexus between politicians and criminals, big riots and killings are highly improbable. Everyday engagement in the neighborhoods may not be able to stand up to marauding gangs protected by powerful politicians, but integrated unions, associations, political parties become bulwarks of peace in two ways. Their local strength convinces those who would benefit from riots that engineering riots is beyond the realms of possibility, or even if violent cadres of polarizing parties and the thugs associated with them try, they do not normally succeed in instigating riots. Why? It's not here. It's not here. Basically, I argued the state works much better in integrated cities. I don't have that slide here. The state, I have interviewed probably 100, I have numbers somewhere, perhaps in the book, 100 IPS officers during this. And I repeatedly asked them the question, once I was heading in this direction. You have in your life as a police officer been in cities where riots took place and cities where riots did not take place. Can you tell me what the difference was? Right? And of course, this would not be, you won't ask this question in Tamil Nadu, where there's no Hindu-Muslim rioting doesn't normally take place. You would ask in Maharashtra, Gujarat, UP, Andhra Pradesh, etc., etc. And only one IPS officer out of 100 or 99 or so, disagreed with the claim that if a town already is integrated, it is easier to police it in times of tensions and riots. Right? Because of the way, and there's a very sophisticated branch of sociology called network theory. You can use that to make this claim, but you don't have to go that far. Basically, information that reaches the police is much more credible. And these networks allow, the highest form of this argument is what is called community policing. I'm not arguing that India has community policing, but wherever the police and the communities can interact better, and the communities themselves are interacting better, policing is easier and sparks do not become fires. It's not that in peaceful cities of India, Hindu boys don't go out with Muslim girls and Muslim girls don't go out with Muslim Hindu boys, or an attempt is not made to throw pigs into mosques. Right? As I argued about Lucknow yesterday. All of those sparks, tensions are there, right? And can emerge. So this argument then led to, can be represented diagrammatically, even peaceful towns have sparks, but they don't have fires. Why? Because the intercommunal civic engagement allows the police and local administration to make sure that sparks do not become fires. Whereas, not in every town and every case, right, would sparks become fires not in every unintegrated town. So, okay, here's an example to illustrate. Lucknow's Hindu traders and Muslim weavers are interdependent, right? A riot would hurt even the trader economically, right? And if it continues for long, and we don't know once it starts how long it will go on, then it can hurt badly. Do you think these traders that I interviewed in Lucknow were not Hindu nationalists? They were. They were going to vote for Hindu nationalism, and they had a lot of reservations about Muslims. But they were not going to accept this consequence, this particular consequence of their prejudice. So the prejudice gets moderated in a situation like that. Right? So you can get, and you can also argue somewhat differently. Oh, in Calicut BJP's president I interviewed. I said, what kind of political life? Now I'm sort of dressing it up a little. This is not how I asked it, but this is what I meant. So what kind of a political life are you leading? You just get 2% of the city's vote. And you've been getting this 2% of the city's vote, and you will continue to get this 2% of city's vote unless the city gets polarized. Why don't you polarize? Isn't it in your interest? He said, he agreed. I cite him. It is in our interest to polarize the city. Then I said, why can't you do it? He said, tell us how to do it in Calicut. Everyone is so integrated. How are we going to polarize the city of Calicut? So I said, so then you are now, until your death, you will be happy with 2% of vote. He said, no. We are not so stupid. We are waiting for the Muslim right, for Islamic Sevak Sangh to make a mistake. If they make a mistake, if they end up creating a riot, that gives us an opening, and then our vote share will go up. I said, I have interviewed them. They are waiting for you to make a mistake. Right? So they are waiting for you. Both of you are saying this city cannot be polarized. And both are waiting for the other to make a mistake. While the Muslim, and you have all kinds of argument against Muslim League, both the BJP and the Islamic Sevak Sangh, right, both see Muslim League as getting too much benefit out of this and betraying the cause or something like that. Right? So here is an argument about, right, you see how this is working. If you're so integrated, it's very hard to break you up. It could be a business integration. It could be a political integration. In the case of Calicut, this business was also an ideology that was there. Communist Party did not believe in Hindu-Muslim polarization. Did not.
Don't you think the prejudice?
Right? And it wanted to create an ideology for, right? And those who participated in that internalized that ideology. That was not a business issue. That is not a business issue. Right? So you see the argument, right?